They're dead, Dave.
What, Captain Hollister?
Everybody's dead, Dave.
What, Todd Hunter? What, Selby? Not Jen.
He's dead, Dave. Everybody is dead. Everybody is dead, Dave.
Hello, welcome to a brand new podcast. I'm Phil, and this, I almost forgot to introduce my co-host. And I've got Adam Martyn with me.
Hello.
Hello. We are going to be going through every episode of Red Dwarf in this brand new podcast. They're all dead, Dave.
They're all dead, Dave.
They're all dead, Dave. They're dead. They're all dead, Dave. That's the name of the podcast. It's a review podcast. We're going to be going through every episode of Red Dwarf in order. And I am someone who has watched from a young age Red Dwarf. I remember watching it in the 90s. I am that old.
The distant past.
The distant past. Oh, the 90s. We were listening to a 90s playlist on one of the smart speakers earlier on, and all those floods of nostalgic memory.
Oh, yes.
But, Adam, you had never seen Red Dwarf, had you?
I had never seen Red Dwarf. I'll preface, I had heard of Red Dwarf, and I'd seen, shots of some of the characters and maybe a few very short clips in documentaries and such, but I have never before now sat down and watched a full episode of Red Dwarf.
And it was that revelation on your YouTube channel, on your Sunday catch-up show, that made me go, I've been meaning to rewatch Red Dwarf. Adam has never watched it. Let's make a podcast where someone who has been a fan of it for like 30 years talks to somebody and reviews it with somebody that has never seen it before. And thus this podcast was born.
Yeah, and I can finally earn my nerd card after this.
I must admit, I was genuinely surprised that you hadn't seen it, because as anybody that watches your YouTube channel will know, you're a sci-fi fan. You like things like Doctor Who.
Oh, yes.
You're a big fan of sort of British nostalgic TV.
I am,
generally,
yes.
BBC in particular. And therefore, it just seems like one of those iconic classic BBC shows that is a sci-fi. So I was really, really surprised. No judgment, but just surprised that you hadn't seen it.
I'm sure some people out there are judging me quite hard, but it's a weird one because, again, I was born in 1996, and I think when, even at, say, the early stages, I could have maybe stumbled on Red Dwarf, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8, I think. Was the show still going on then, in early 2000s?
It's had so many breaks of several years in between seasons that it's hard to... Because I think 1997 was when they had... I think 1996, if I'm remembering correctly, 1997 might have been where it came back for 2 series, for series 7 and 8.
Okay.
And then it had a really long break of like a decade after that. And then I can't remember when we got back to Earth, but it might have been a little bit after that. So
I must admit, that is the one thing I did know about Red Dwarf, because it was either in... Part of me thinks it used to get sort of weirdly cross-promoted in Doctor Who magazine or, in various sci-fi publications. I remember every few years I keep seeing, it's Red Dwarf 10 or 11 or 12. And I was like, I don't know what this show is, but it seems to keep coming back every... But as I said, I remember that bit that it came back every so often. I was like, oh, well, people must really like this show. But it was only when you suggested doing this, I looked into it. I was like, what? It started in 1988 or whatever it was, and it's it's a lot bigger than I think I ever realized it was.
Yeah, it's just been going so long. If anybody at home wants to watch along with us before listening to our review every week, the first 8 seasons or series, I'm going American now. The first 8 series are available on Netflix. Then I believe Back to Earth, which is a unique sort of special mini series thing, is only available on DVD. I haven't found it on a streaming service. And then the series 10, 11, and 12 are available on Dave on streaming in the UK. I don't know about the US, I'm afraid, if we've got any US listeners out there.
How apt is it that the channel it's on now is called Dave?
I know.
I've just realised. It's just clicked in my head. So
yeah. So this first episode is called The End. the one that introduces us to all of our main characters for now. There are additional main characters that get introduced in later seasons, but our main characters for now get introduced in this episode. What were your thoughts on no, actually, before this, I forgot to ask you one question. What was your overriding? I mean, you said you were aware of Red Dwarf. What was your overriding sort of impression of it before you watched it?
I think from what I'd either seen or like heard about it, it was my perception was it's this really campy, but intentionally campy sort of sci-fi comedy show. I just thought, you know, they're playing it for laughs. It's not, I guess, again, to compare like to Doctor Who, where you can laugh at it, but that's not always the intention. I just sort of thought this is going to be a very sort of, not over the top, but a bit more heightened, you know, sci-fi than I'm probably used to, but not in a bad way. I think I was just more curious as to how they were gonna play it, because I was trying to delve into what I know about, you know, making TV sci-fi at that time, and obviously the late 80s, those in charge of the BBC weren't whether privately or publicly, weren't particularly kind to sci-fi. I mean, you know, you had Michael Grade, who Doctor Who fans will know at that time detested Doctor Who in particular, but science fiction. A lot of the higher ups just thought it wasn't a good spend of the, you know, taxpayers' money. So I think going into this one, knowing it was in that era, I thought, how, you know, what's this going to look like, pretty much.
And then watching it for the first time this week, what did you think of the first episode? What are your general thoughts?
Do you know, again, with that context in mind of, you know, how the people in the BBC weren't really keen on sci-fi, I thought this came off as really impressive. I mean, the opening shot, or the title sequence, if you like, is, you know, the panning shot of the Red Dwarf ship. And as it's going, I was like, one, it made me think a lot of Trial of a Time Lord from Doctor Who, that opening shot. I think it was like the same colours and all that. But I was also like, wow, like this is very impressive for the time. They clearly spent a lot of money on this. You know, it's a very, very competent bit of model work there. And then
that model work. I mean, the model work throughout the whole show is really good, but especially on that Red Dwarf model, it's just so detailed, and you get the panning shots across it and everything. It's really impressive work for, you know, the time and everything.
Yeah.
And technical limitations.
I think it holds up as well, especially that opening shot. You know, I mean, if you squint really hard, you can tell it's a model like going against a backdrop. But if you just sat there watching it, I'd argue it's just as, you know, it's just as memorable as anything we get today in TV sci-fi. And I thought that about all the sets on the Red Dwarf as well. You know, again, for the time, I was like, these look really competent, really well thought out, really well designed. And I thought, well, why didn't, again, like, you know, other sci-fi shows in the BBC, like Doctor Who, look like this at the time in terms of set design? But then I thought, well, it's easier for them because at the minute, anyway, from what I've seen, the only place they are in is the Red Dwarf. You know, Doctor Who goes here, there, and everywhere. They've got to stretch that budget, whereas here they could probably concentrate that money into being like, right, let's spend a lot on the model, let's spend a lot on like the bridge and the crew quarters and the cafeteria, you know, really funnel it. And I just, when that sort of clicked in my head, I was like, they've done this really well. It really feels like a ship that's been lived in.
Yeah, and I suppose, yeah, they've got they get a lot more money out of standing sets because they get to reuse them again and again over, you know, potentially multiple years. Whereas something like Doctor Who has the one standing set, and that is the interior of the TARDIS, and everything else has to be completely new every week. So yeah, that's going to be a bit more of a strain on your budgets, isn't it? Although I think, you know, Doctor Who has a bit of a bad reputation for that, but you know, I think it varies so much on episode to episode with Doctor Who. Some episodes have really good sets, and then other times it looks like a cardboard. You know, it will fall over easily. But at least because most of these are standing sets that will be used again and again. I can't remember now if they ever go off the ship in series 1. They do eventually start doing it, but it might not be till series 2. It's been a while since I've watched these early ones. So
I think that's what I'm curious about as well, because I mean, from what I've seen so far, as you say, they are just on the Red Dwarf ship, and I just sort of think if it is for the whole season, I'm down for it, but I'm curious to see how they keep that, I guess, fresh and interesting. Because, you know, if you just say to someone, oh, here's 8 episodes, and they're just on a ship the whole time, you know, initially you think, oh, well, how can that be interesting?
Yeah.
But from what I've seen so far, I'm confident that it's going to be interesting, because, I mean, at the start of this one, you've got a lot of the crew, and I'll diverge a minute. You know, in the cafeteria scene, when they're doing Dave's doing the coin thing.
Oh yes,
on his
yes.
head. The guy who he gets to do it and sort of take the mick out of, is that Mark Williams? Arthur Weasley.
Arthur Weasley, yes, it is. It's Arthur Weasley.
It is, yeah. Because I
Yes.
saw him and I was like, I know that face. I was like a really young, blonde Arthur Williams. So I was like, oh, that's nice.
It is, yeah. You see, there's a few faces that pop up in this show that you see and you go, hold on, they became a lot better known for this other thing later on. It's quite nice like that.
Well, I mean, for me, the big one was Craig Charles. I think I'd sort of, because for me, I grew up with Craig Charles as like Robot Wars and things like that.
Of course, yes.
And I think I guess whatever I saw him in, I always just saw him as like a host or an announcer. I never knew he was an actor by trade. So as soon as his face popped up, I was like, okay, Craig Charles, I like it. And I mean, it's so nice to watch a bit of BBC 80s TV and hear a different accent that's not RP or like, standard English. As soon as he's unabashedly with that lovely, smooth Scouse accent. And I was like, I'm here. I think I'll watch that show home for that, just to hear his voice because... And, I think people don't take, when you watch a lot of that TV, it is that, oh, yes, we're going to talk like this. And I guess Rimmer is the catalyst for that. He is very much that, very uptight, we're going to speak properly here on this ship. And I like how Lister's the sort of foil to that in every single way. He's a slob, but he's not ashamed to speak how he does and all that sort of stuff. But because, I mean, I've seen a few episodes of All Creatures Great and Small, the original, which, of course, is all about Yorkshire vets. Yet everyone seems to speak like this. And I'm like...
In perfect RP.
Yeah, and it's like, okay. And I know, like, the old BBC adage was, oh, well, standard English RP is, like, the most... people can understand it more. It's debatably the most accessible accent. I disagree, but that was the thing at the time. So, yeah, I like the range as well. Like, you had the American captain, and you had the... I can't remember her name, but, the woman in the bridge that Lister's trying to chat up. She's...
Kachansky.
Kachansky, was that Scottish? Am I getting mixed up?
Well, she sounds a little bit Scottish to me. I don't know if
Celtic twang.
That's an interesting one because she comes back in later on, but played by in many seasons later, but played by a different actress, and she loses the Scottish. So, but here I think she's meant to be Scottish. So I was going to say exactly the same thing. I was going to say that the American captain. They have a nice and you get the cat introduced later on in this episode as well, who again has a very distinctive voice and a very distinctive style of speaking as well. So there's a whole range of different sort of vocal differences in this episode that make it really interesting to listen to.
I must admit though, when the cat first appeared for like the first 2 minutes, I was very confused as to like what this guy was supposed to be. Because, he comes out doing all this, like, wow, and, like, walking around. And I was like, is this like, a Prince Michael Jackson caricature? But you know what I mean? It's like that sort of quick energy and the spins.
I think that might have been part of the intention to make that, like, a lot of it is about his vanity and stuff. But I think that, a lot of it probably did come from, I think, Prince. This is not based on anything knowledge. I haven't seen it in an interview that they've said this, but it does seem very Prince-like, doesn't it? And that could absolutely be the inspiration.
I think it was more the way like they'd made up his hair and like the suit and everything. But as soon as he popped out, and obviously when he said he was like a descendant of a cat, it made more sense. But like for that first minute before he meets Dave and Rimmer, I was like, what is this character supposed to be? Not in a bad way. I was just a bit confused because, as he comes out of the vent from absolutely nowhere. There's no prelude to it, and then all of a sudden you're introduced to this guy who's going like, and like walking around and spinning and going like, oh, I look so good, and I'm like, I love it, but like, who are you? So
going back to the sort of very beginning of the episode, I thought that the that very first scene where Rimmer and Lister are walking down the corridor doing their job, fixing the vending machines or whatever they're fixing, the food distribution things. I thought that was a really good scene for sort of establishing the dynamic between the two. It tells you everything you need to know about both characters in that one scene and their relationship to each other, which is going to, be the bedrock of the show going forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I did wonder, like, as we said, the opening shot of each episode is like, the shot of the ship, and I thought, oh, maybe they're going to do like, a big crew thing to start with, and then they'll focus on the individual characters. But no, you're right. I agree. To start with those two and instantly establish who they are, what they sort of stand for, where their differences are, but where they kind of get along. They're sort of, you could say they're like an old married couple. Like, they bicker all the time, but if like push came to shove, they try and have each other's backs if they were pushed to it. But no, I liked it. I mean, both actors did a great job of solidifying what those characters are, because I think when you break it down, just from my standpoint, I thought those characters could have very easily been, like maybe stereotyped or overacted, if you like. The traits of them are very easy, I think, to fall into that. But I think they did a good job of, they lent into it just enough, but not to the point where it got a bit ridiculous,
What would you say is your... What else did you like about the episode? What were your highlights of the episode?
I mean, Holly, the computer, is
Yes.
just... I think that's my favourite character of the show so far. I just love the whole... the deadpan approach, I mean, we've all seen examples of deadpan comedy and how brilliant it can be. And, just seeing that face sort of not move and just go, yeah, I'm going to say an insult now. It's like, it does work wonderfully, because I think that was one of my criticisms of the show so far. Or I can save that till later if you like, but...
No. Hey, we're just chatting. Do it organically. Just give it to us now. What?
I thought some of the humour, and I should have noted down a specific joke, but there were little moments which I thought came across to me as the humour wise maybe a bit too too juvenile. But again, that could be because I'm an adult watching this for the first time. If I was like 9, I probably would have like lent into it all the way. But like, I just thought there was a contrast, because like you have characters like Holly who deliver jokes that maybe are a bit darker and a bit more on the nose, and then there were just some bits with Dave and Rimmer where they're just it's like just name calling, but it doesn't really feel like there's a payoff. Or that was just what I thought anyway. Not that the whole episode was bad on the comedy front. I think there was just specific bits where I'm watching it like this, watching it, and they tell a joke, and it didn't really prompt a reaction. But again, that could just be I'm watching it as an adult with a very cynical brain. So, I mean, what did you think about like the humor aspect? For you rewatching it.
Yeah, this episode, I really liked it. Holly definitely is, and I find Holly one of the best characters in the whole series in these early years, because that whole deadpan approach, it just works so well. And I forgot, I should have looked up the actor's name. I know his name is Norman, but I can't remember his last name.
Yeah, it's Norman something, isn't it?
Yeah. But he just does such a fantastic job in this role. So always good. In terms of my favourite character in this episode, though, I was tempted to say Holly, but only because Holly is in it so little. I mean, absolutely, he shines in this episode in the small bits he is in, but he's in it quite a small amount. So I think if I was picking a favourite character out of this episode specifically, I would probably say Rimmer, because I just think some of it... Chris Barry is great at just doing all sorts of voices, and I just think he's got his comic timing is brilliant in this, and some of the stuff he comes out with in this episode particularly as well is just really, really good, especially when he's sort of mocking Dave as well. So that was definitely my favorite character of it. If I had to pick sort of a funniest moment of the whole episode, I had a couple written down. One of which made me laugh out loud, and then I was like, because talking about the humor, I really like the humor, but some of it, I was slightly worried going in rewatching this that I would find some of it a little bit dated. In the sense that, it might make us cringe a little bit now in the world of 2020 when we're all much more enlightened. And there was one line in there that Rimmer's line was when he was talking about being dead, and he was like, I'll never get to do so many things again, and one of them was interfere with a woman sexually. And by itself, that is a little bit thing. But then what I really liked was just what made me laugh out loud was Lister's reply, which was, Rimmer, you didn't do any of those things anyway. And that made me laugh out loud. So I'm kind of conflicted about that line, but it was, but Lister's line was definitely, come back on that, was definitely one of my favorites. Oh yes, the other one was when the Dave gets pulled up to the captain and confronted about his cat.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite lines was, not only are you so stupid that you bring an unquarantined cat onto the ship and endanger everyone, you also took photos with it and had them developed in the ship's photo lab.
And the fact he still denies it, he's like, no, it wasn't me, sir. Like, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, there's the "They're all dead, Dave" line, which is
that was one of mine. Yeah,
a whole sequence, which kind of feels like both that it goes on too long, but also it needed to go on that long. It went on sort of just the right amount of time to be funny.
Yeah, that is one of my contenders for funniest moment as well. And it was weird because that was one thing you told me about before we did the show, I guess just as like a preamble. And when he said it, you know, the first time, I was like, oh, that was what Philip was going on about. And I think I forgot that you'd mentioned, you know, it goes on. So I was like, oh, yeah, that was kind of funny. And then he just keeps going, they're all dead. Everyone's dead, Dave. And I just feel the smile on my face getting bigger and I'm starting to laugh. But I think, again, it's down to that thing of Holly just being so deadpan, yet you can hear the irritation in his voice as well. The more he's saying it, it's like, they're all dead, Dave. Like, they're all dead.
Absolutely. I don't think it would have worked with another person delivering that line.
I think the other one for me was, I can't remember this specific crew member, but when he does come out of stasis and he sees the like pile of ash on the control panel, he's like, oh, what's this? And he just goes, that's crew member. And, you know, he says what it is. Because that was so unexpected, I just burst out laughing. Because, again, it's the timing, it's the delivery. And Craig Charles's response to it, it was...
The thing about that, though, is that what struck me about that was that he makes a comment about it being really dirty around here while he's licking it. Like, he thinks it's dirt or dust, and he's licking it. He doesn't think it's food. He's talking about it being dirty. And it's then only when he finds out that it's human remains that he gets a bit disgusted about it. That kind of epitomizes how slobbish and disgusting, you know, Dave is meant to be. That's actually
but then
something...
What heightened it for me was then, as he's talking to Holly, he just brushes it off the control panel. So he's gone, oh, it's a human, I can't touch it. Yeah, let's just move that along. Again, it just made me laugh because it's like you've just been disgusted at this human remains, and now you're like, yeah, just get it off, like get it off the table. What I like about Lister already is sort of how quick his character beats change, but they don't feel like... I think it helps because this is a comedy. If it was a drama, you know, when characters' beats or like actions change willy-nilly, it annoys us because it's like, no, you're trying to sell us on like one thing and now you've swapped to another without any build-up. Whereas with a comedy, I think you can get away with that because that's partly why it's funny. Yeah. And at the minute, I love that about Lister, how 1 minute, you know, oh, it's a human, I can't touch it. And then he's just like, yeah, just get that off the desk. You know, I like that sort of quick change about it, and I think Craig Charles so far from what I've seen has been so on point with his delivery. Even with the jokes I said that I felt were a bit maybe too juvenile for me now, the timing was still like on point. You know, you could tell he knew what he was doing.
One thing about a Lister that is interesting is that it's a very British thing, I think, that the main character, the character that we, you know, root for in the show, is a complete slob, is a complete like disgusting human being in many ways, and that you know that wouldn't happen on American television. No. And as proof of that, they actually piloted an American remake of Red Dwarf.
Oh no!
And
see, even from having watched one episode, I'm already like it. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, and as Dave Lister, they cast this sort of like hunky, chiseled jawed man. You know, had a kind of Han Solo look to him. You know, swagger. So, you know, a bit rough around the edges, but not...
Was it still a comedy?
It was still a comedy, yeah. It was a sitcom. It was, and it didn't get past the pilot stage. And I think, if I remember correctly, I used to own the DVDs of Red Dwarf, but I stupidly got rid of them many years ago.
Oh,
clear out. I know. And I think the whole pilot is one of the extras on one of those DVDs, so I may have to track it down. And if I can find it, maybe at some point in the future of this podcast, we'll have to do a special just reviewing that.
Oh boy.
Because that could be amusing. That could definitely be amusing. Just thinking about the rest of the episode and what other positives we might have, I noted down a few things. Because this episode, It's a good 2/3 of the way through before the disaster happens.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, I'm assuming you've watched it if you're listening to this podcast. But of course, Dave gets, because of his cat situation of having an unauthorized cat aboard, and he won't give it up and tell the captain where it is. He gets put into suspended animation for the rest of their journey, which was meant to be 18 months. But instead, during those 18 months, the whole crew dies of a radiation leak, and Lister ends up staying in that suspended animation for 3 million years. So he sort of emerges doing that. But that didn't happen till a good way through the episode. And I liked that because it gave us a lot of setup of the dynamics of how the ship worked before that, which I think gives us a better understanding of the characters which we're now going to follow going through the rest of the series.
No, I like that in a way because, again, from what I'd known about Red Dwarf, when you see like the promo images, I knew it's centered maybe around 3 or 4 central characters. And so, as you say, from the first scene, I know 2 of them are Dave and Rimmer because, it tells you so in the first scene. But, as you say, for the first 2/3, you've got the rest of the crew as well. So I'm thinking, oh, cool, I'm going to see a fun comedy about this crew and like what all their escapades, what they get up to. And then you're right. I was like, oh, they are all dead, Dave. They are all dead, Dave. And I think once that set in after that initial comedy of, Holly and that, I think I was like, oh, right, it is literally just Lister and Rimmer the hologram and this cat. And, at the end of the episode, it's them 3 saying, oh, we're going to go back to Earth. I was like, oh, right. I was like, okay, it is just going to be these 3.
Yeah.
And I was like,
well, 4
at first
if you
I was
include
like,
Holly.
4 if you include Holly. And at first I was like, ooh, because, it's a jump, isn't it, from the first 2/3. I was like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. But then I was like, no, but I mean, this is the opportunity for it to try and sell it to me. How can you make this comedy show work with 3 characters on one ship?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
They did. I also, during this whole section before the event happened, before the radiation leak happened, I thought they did a really good job of sort of setting stuff up, which they then paid off in that final section. And it was various things like just setting up the stuff with the cat, just dropping in little lines about the cat. At the time you don't think it's massively relevant beyond the fact that Lister's hiding this cat and he's going to get in trouble for it, but actually like the thing about Fiji and stuff that plays into the cat's religion later on in the episode, the Cat Society religion, and how his name has been confused, and they worship someone called Cloister because it's Lister, but then over the generations of the cats, it's all been twisted. That kind of setup and payoff. There was also, because we see a hologram get brought back to life in an earlier scene in the episode, and it's this Welsh guy that's been brought back, and that sort of establishes in that scene, they did a lot of clever exposition which established the rules of Holly can only sustain 1 hologram at a time, which explains why we don't get more than just Rimmer returning as holograms later on. So that kind of sort of setup and payoff there was good as well. And Holly himself as well. He wasn't in it much before the incident, but the few scenes where you did hear his voice, it was a very serious computer voice, issuing instructions and stuff over the tannoys and things. And then it's only like afterwards, when you see him afterwards, and he kind of is acting a bit goofy a little bit. And he mentions that, 3 million years by yourself, it's bound to drive someone a little crazy. And you realise that actually he's this way because of that time.
Yeah, that he's actually got a personality beyond just being the ship's computer that has to be logical and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, no, and it's a good subversion. And just going back a bit, I know you talked about the cat's religion. That made me laugh, but I think maybe not for the reason the producers intended, I don't know. But the way I took it, I mean, disclaimer, I'm a raging atheist. I've got nothing against religion. If you religion, whatever it is, cool, fine by me. But it's not for me. And how I interpreted it was sort of taking a playful jab at how certain religions can be formed, say like a mishearing of names, this idea of like a savior. I just took it as that. It was like this sort of jab at like, this is ridiculous, but then that's how some people argue, say, like, with the Mormon stuff, like the Book of Mormon, that is taking a jab at how, a guy found a book that was given to him by God, and now there's this whole, some people would argue that's ridiculous, but then the religion, it's one of the strongest religions out there. So that's how I sort of interpreted that whole story of the cat religion. I was like, I was laughing because I was like, they're just taking a jab at the whole thing.
Yeah, and even 30 years later, that plot line was still being used as part of the story in the very latest episode that came out this year, last year now, I suppose. But yeah, there was a one-off special that came out last year, and that the cat religion was the focus of that episode. So it's really nice how they, and I'm sure it's more of a case of they mentioned, they put stuff like that in the plot earlier on with no plans, but then later on they go, we could reference back to that. But I really like how the show does that, and it really honors its own history. But obviously you won't know that yet, but
not yet. I'm looking forward to it, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Was there anything, I mean, you've already touched on one thing you didn't like. There wasn't much I didn't like about this. Like I said, some of the humor, very little of it, in fact, felt dated.
Yeah.
And I was really pleased about that. There was just like that one or two moments. The only other negative I had about this episode was, well, there's two. One was that I thought visually, other than the model shots, it's a little bit dull visually because it's all greys and browns and just the sort of color palette of the show. You get the lovely bright red of the ship, but then inside it's all very, and I know that's because it's meant to be a sort of militaristic sort of bureaucratic, boring.
Yeah, because it's a mining ship, right?
Yeah,
the Red Dwarf. Yeah.
But later seasons they bring in more color and it starts to pop a little bit more, and I think that's better.
Yeah, I think it shows sort of that. I mean, as I said near the start, like the sets themselves, like the way they're designed, are brilliant, and they hold up really well. But yeah, that sort of grey thing for space, when you think it sort of reeks of that late 80s British sci-fi. Oh, we're in space. Everything's got to be like stainless steel or like greys and things like
which
that.
Can work
it's sort of
under movie budget sort of things where you can light it to look like actual metal. And and it can be the sort of interest can come from the lighting, but with TV, especially at that era, everything was pretty much just blanketly lit so that you could see what was going on, and I don't think there was too much thought about mood lighting and things like that. So
I think from what I've read of that time, that was a lot of directors and creatives' critiques of TV at that time, that everything was overlit.
Yeah.
In a lot of shows, not just sci-fi, but I think there were only one or two scenes I think when they're walking through corridors, and this sounds really odd, but it's the sound like their boots make that scream out to me they're walking on a set. And,
okay.
Like the only way I can compare it, because I watched it recently, for anyone who hasn't seen it, the last second Doctor Who story, The War Games, which went out in 1969, you see Gallifrey for the first time, the Time Lords. But that trial room set, when they walk into it, they go down these steps and it's clonk, clonk, clonk. And you just think, oh my God. And it's fair to say they had no money at that point in the show's history. They had no money. It was 10 episodes. They had ran out. But do you know what I mean? It's moments like that. If I can hear your boots clonking, and for anyone who's been on a set, you know what it sounds like. If you hear I'll call it the studio set clonk, then it just very briefly takes me out of it because I'm going, okay. Studio set. Because, I mean, if you stop to think about Red Dwarf, it is all studio set. Of course it is. But that wasn't my prevailing thought when watching it, because of the characters were good, the story was engaging. You're not thinking about that. I think it was only in those quiet moments, if it is just, walking down a corridor where there's not much else to sort of grab you, when I hear those boots and I'm like, But again, that's a minor nitpick on my card. Yeah.
And the other thing was, I'm not sure if I count this as a negative, because I understand why they did it, but the cat who we know is going to be a main character in the show, he's one of the 4 main characters in the show who we will follow, is only in the last 5 minutes of the episode.
Yes.
And I get why, because they had to, because it gave space to do all the stuff to establish Rimmer and Dave as well, Dave Lister as well, and their dynamic. And they are kind of the main focus, especially of these early seasons. So I understand why. I just would have liked a little bit more of the cat introduced a little bit earlier, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Like I said, the first minute he's on screen before he bumps into the other two, I was so confused. And maybe that was the intention to make people think like, whoa, what's this? What's going on? But yeah, maybe if they did like, in the stasis period, if you like, the 3 million years, maybe if they'd done some sort of, not like a whole exposition thing, but maybe just a weird, like, physical thing with the cat to show more of that cat likeness before he enters the ship. Because as I said, for me at least, when he first comes in, and he's standing up and moving around, it just came across as being like more flamboyant human than it did like feline. And in the next episode, if you want to keep listening, we'll talk more about the cat. But again, from seeing the second one, I got more of like, the feline aspect, like the cat aspect. Whereas in this episode, I just got more really flamboyant human than I did cat human sort of thing.
Cool. Well, I think that's everything I had. Did you have any other notes you want to talk about?
Yeah. Oddly enough, the credits song, because the music, there wasn't that much music throughout. Not that there isn't a lot of comedies because you need, the laugh track and all that sort of stuff. But to start with the start, it was very, again, BBC of the time, that the same synthesizer they had in the cupboard, and it sounded great, don't get me wrong. If anything, it made it seem, that opening shot, like a gritty drama, because the opening theme or rendition is quite like low key, it's quite tense,
it's all like
quite it's quite like foreboding as this big ship is going by. So yeah, when I knew it was a comedy, but if I didn't know it was that, I might be thinking, oh, is this like a space drama or something? And then the credit scene, it's so 80s. It's so, the production of it, because again, I thought, are they going to use the same synth thing? Are they going to do like a futuristic piece? But no, they get like a really because what is it? Is it Fun in the Sun, the song?
Yeah, something like that. It's cold outside, shipwrecked and comatose, drinking fresh mango juice. Yeah. Goldfish glow, nipping at her toes. I might be getting some of the words wrong here. Fun in the sun.
That's the one. I've got nothing against 80s pop. I love 80s pop, but I think it just surprised me, because obviously being made in 1988, there was no real call to that apart from like the nitpicks we had, like sets or whatever. But then that just blares in at the end. I was like, oh, it's the 80s, So,
I love it though. It's so catchy. It's brilliant.
It is
bizarrely.
Very catchy.
If you listen to the lyrics, they have nothing to do with the show.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's what weirded me out. I was like, this has nothing to do with the show. They just picked a really upbeat, poppy 80s song and was like, yeah, that'll do.
Yeah.
But yeah, apart from that, yeah. My overall thoughts on the end, if you like, which very cleverly added the beginning at the end. I saw that little title come up. I was like, I like it. Yeah, I thought, for someone who's never seen it before, it's a great first episode for introducing you to the two leads primarily, Lister and Rimmer. This sort of world that they live in, the different sort of classes that exist on the Red Dwarf ship, how they're just seen as sort of lowly technicians, the sort of common traits they have, how Rimmer always wants to like do well and be proper and by the book, and Lister just sort of doesn't really care. He's just there for a bit of banter, No, I thought as first episodes go, it did what it needed to do, and it did it well.
Yeah, it was a good setup for the premise of the show, and I think a lot of shows of this era, certainly my memory of them, is that the setup for the premise of the show usually was like 10 minutes, and then you were into a standard episode for a show. Whereas this actually takes the time and does a whole episode, where the first 20 minutes are with a whole cast that you're not going to get for the rest of the series, and actually takes the time to properly set up the premise, which I think was rare from back then, at least from my memory of it. I usually like the setup would be something that could be condensed into a quick pre-credit sequence nowadays.
It's surprising for a comedy as well, because as you say, a lot of comedies when they start, like, yeah, you have the establishing thing, but like you say, they want to zip along and get to like the comedy aspect. So I think that was drawing from the more dramatic sci-fi element, sort of saying we need the time of sci-fi shows to build, but we also want to be funny at the same time. And I think it straddled the two really well.
Yeah. Well, that's our thoughts on it. I didn't broach this with you beforehand. Do you want to give it a rating, or do you not like doing ratings?
Because it's not something I've usually done, but I'm down to give it a go if you want to. I'm
Yeah,
up for it.
well, go on.
Yeah,
Then.
let's
give it a go.
What should we rate it out of?
Out of
like 5 Daves out of 5.
five days out of five scuttlebugs out of
Scuttlebugs, yeah.
Scuttlebugs, the little robot things.
It was nice to see them because I'd seen them in my one of the shows I do on my channel is about idents, and I did a whole episode, funnily enough, on Red Dwarf idents, which is probably where I got a lot of the vague pre-knowledge I had. I knew when it started and the 4 leads, but yeah, I don't think I actually I did call it by its name because I had to look it up, but I had no idea what it was, so it was nice to actually see it. I was like, oh, it's that thing,
Yeah, it's that from that ident.
Yeah, I'd rate it, so the first episode, the end, I'd rate it 4.5 scuttlebugs out of 5, I think, because as I said, it does exactly what it needs to do well. For the most part, in my opinion, it's very funny. It looks very impressive for a late 80s BBC sci-fi show at a time when sci-fi was loathed by the corporation. And it left me wanting more, which is the job of any good show.
Yeah, I completely agree. 4.5, I think I would give it to. I was going to give it 4, but let's do 0.5s because I think it deserves it. There was hardly anything wrong with it at all. And I really enjoyed it. And like you say, it's a good setup. And it sounds like it has intrigued you enough. I mean, you've already agreed to do the podcast now, so you're stuck watching them anyway. But at least it sounds like you're going to enjoy it.
No, yeah. I mean, let's put it this way. When it ended and, that little thing came up saying the beginning, not only did that make me smile, but I was like, okay. I was like, I'm in now. I want to see where this goes. If the characterization hadn't been there, if the comedy hadn't worked with me, I might have been like, oh, this will be a bit of a slog. But no, I'm genuinely very excited to continue on this Red Dwarf journey.
Excellent. And if you at home are keen to continue it with us, we will be here for covering the whole of the series gradually.
Yeah, man.
Every episode, in possibly even the American remake, if we if we can track it down.
The cursed American remake.
Yes. I'm not entirely sure where this is going out yet. It's definitely going to go out on my YouTube channel. I may also try and find a way of putting it out on Spotify and other platforms as well. Look, where can they find you on the internet? Plug your stuff.
So, for me, if you want to find me in my stupidly tall hair that needs a haircut, you can find me on YouTube. Just type in Adam Martyn. That's Martyn with a Y, because A, I'm half Welsh, and I'm proud of it. And just because in any walk of life that I've had to use that, it always gets spelt wrong. And I can't casting directors out there. Shame on you. You talk about sending in your CV, being all correct, and yet if you give me a job, you're like, yeah, can we have Adam Martyn with an I? You read my CV. You know how it's spelt. So I'm getting on a rant there. But yeah, Adam Martyn with a Y, and you'll find me on YouTube. I'm also on Twitter at Adam Martyn Actor. I post a lot about stuff going on my channel, a lot of Doctor Who stuff, because that's what I'm into as well. And I'll be tweeting about this podcast when we get it up and running. So yeah, that's the best place to find me.
And if you are listening to this, if I have managed to get it onto another platform other than my YouTube channel, then you can find my YouTube channel. Again, it's just my name, Philip Hawkins, Philip with 1 L. That's the one I always get. It's like, oh, some people spell it with 2 L's. No, it's 1 L.
They'll never understand, Philip. They'll never understand.
so yeah, do check Adam out at his YouTube channel. He does some great shows over there, including the aforementioned ident reviews, which have been a lot of fun, and a lot of Doctor Who content coming. It's very soon. Thanks for watching, listening, whatever you're doing, and we will be here for the next episode soon. See you then.